When someone says prehistoric apex predators, I bet your prehistoric nerd brain goes from here, here, or here. All very valid assumptions. They are big and bitey. But did you know that there were actually creatures that hunted dinosaurs? Yep. Let's discuss. Rise of the Dinosaurs. The first episode of the Dinosaur trilogy is about establishing shots and setting the scene. This was their rise to the top, and we come into their story right after a mysterious catastrophic event at the beginning of the Triassic. But this was no run-of-the-mill catastrophic event. This was perhaps the worst assault on biology the world had ever staged. The Permian extinction was so profoundly destructive that it's become known as the Great Dying. It was the largest mass extinction in Earth's history, occurring around 252 million years ago, wiping out an estimated 90% of species, including 96% of marine life and 70% of terrestrial species. Despite being named the Great Dying, it wasn't that great for the vast majority of life on Earth. Aside from Lystrosaurus, there were almost no other vertebrates on land for several million years or so. It's thought that Lystrosaurus was able to survive due to its burrowing behavior, which provided refuge from the harsh environmental changes, including the decrease in oxygen and increase in carbon dioxide. That, and it wasn't a picky eater, with its diet consisting of pretty much anything it came across. Anyway, enough with this little mole rat that didn't hunt dinosaurs at all. Once life on Earth rebounded, it came back with a vengeance with the archosaurs. This brings us to the archosaur evolution. Today, there are two groups of archosaur, the birds and the crocodilians. But in the beginning, there were archosauromorphs. These show up in the mid-Permian, in the prequel to the Dinosaur trilogy. At this stage, they were sort of like large, lumbering crocodiles with hooked noses. Wait, aren't these dinosaurs? No, you moron! Dinosaurs are a type of archosaur, and are distinct in that they are primarily terrestrial reptiles, had upright limbs, and lived during the Mesozoic era, which is divided into the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous. So they are distinctly different from our crocodilian and bird friends. Okay, glad that we cleared that one up. There were many lines of archosaur branching out into the newly available niches, including the bird line. Tarsalia, which shows up around 245 million years ago, and the crocodilian line, Pseudosuchia, that emerged just slightly before them and quickly came to dominate the terrestrial niches. The bird line was in its infancy, and at this stage, they were simply very early dinosaurs. So they emerged into a plethora of gaping, Pseudosuchian jaws waiting for them. Some examples of the top predators around at this time included a small group of bipedal, theropod-looking Pseudosuchian called Poposaurus. These little reptiles were the blueprint for what a lot of theropod dinosaurs would later find success with. They grew to around 100 kilograms, 5 meters long, with a long tail making up half of its body length. Their hind legs were twice as long as their arms, which were held off the ground as it ran after its prey, actual dinosaurs. They would have been the apex predator of their range, out-dinosauring the dinosaurs with fast acceleration, powerful jaws, and likely high bursts of speed. They likely would have chased down the smaller bipedal dinosaurs who were still figuring things out. Angiolopus have been found from the same location and period, suggesting dinosaurs were running from Poposaurus at the time. In fact, at this stage, all the apex terrestrial predators were Pseudosuchians. The Rausuchians took all the top spots in the early to mid-Triassic. Fossilosuchus was one of the largest of this group of Pseudosuchians, and came in as one of the later examples, towards the end of the Triassic, but at this time, they'd figured out how to get very large. Fossilosuchus grew up to 10 meters long, making it the largest non-dinosaur fully terrestrial predator known, and this thing would have been teaching early dinosaurs the ropes. It was a quadruped, probably somewhere between a leather lion and a crocodile, standing tall rather than sprawled, but with a long row of scaled armor down its back and a long, narrow mouth full of terrifying teeth. These enormous pursuit predators likely got large by way of an evolutionary arms race against the emerging sauropods of the time like Melanosaurus. Whether they hunted alone or in groups isn't known, but they were surely built to be the world's earliest apex predators of the dinosaur giants. Two Pseudosuchians of particular note were Prestosuchus and Saurosuchus, 7-meter, 400-kilogram runners with narrow faces, perhaps even recognizable as protocroc. But these animals were built for stamina, and had curved, serrated teeth for slicing through the meaty muscle of large dinosaurs. Crocodiles nowadays can't run for long, but these primitive crocodiles would have been all-terrain killers, less sprawling, and with more stamina than modern crocs, and would have made it very difficult for the dinosaurs to get a claw in. And there were tons more pseudotsuchians, munching on dinosaurs all the way to the end of the Triassic, when another disaster occurred, and the world was again thrown into biological turmoil. Towards the end of the Triassic, the supercontinent Pangaea was breaking up, and this was causing all kinds of tectonic bedlam, with volcanoes spewing gases into the atmosphere and the climate going all over the place. From this, another catastrophic filtration event emerged that ended the Triassic on a cliffhanger. This brings us to the Jurassic. With the majority of pseudotsuchians succumbing to the Triassic extinction event, dinosaurs, once relegated to scurrying around at their feet, emerged as the dominant predators everywhere. Everywhere except the sky and the water, that is. But the domination of the dinosaurs was always limited to the land, and we can thank the pseudotsuchians for this. Fading were the days of upright, sprinting land rausuchians, but in their place evolved the first crocodilomorphs, crocodile-like reptiles, and the ancestors to modern crocodiles. The pterosaurs also make a big appearance at this time. Pterosaurs were the first vertebrates to evolve powered flight, and took to the skies to achieve total aerial domination through the Jurassic. So now we have dinosaurs taking on the protagonist role, and the two major antagonists, the crocodilomorphs and the pterosauromorphs. In the waters of the Triassic and Jurassic lurked the ichthyosaurs and the plesiosaurs, respectively, a permanent threat to any dinosaur trying to take on the oceans. But they never did, and never would. And that's because dinosaurs had plenty of suppression from the air superiority of pterosaurs and the coastal defense of the crocs. Pterosaurs came in all sizes. The smallest known was the adorable Nemicolopterus, whose wingspan reached no more than 25 centimeters. But the largest was almost 500 times this length, and for Jurassic dinosaur hunters, and the largest flying animal of its time, looked no further than D'Arc. There was nothing gentle about this D'Arc. Its final form is still unknown, but a fossil of a juvenile shows that pterosaur gigantism began long before the Cretaceous, and D'Arc was likely one of its pioneers, at almost 3 meters across as a mere child. Its total size is hard to estimate with certainty, as many of its phalanges are missing, but estimates still make this one of the largest known Jurassic pterosaurs, with the upper bound pushing close to 4 meters in wingspan, which is nuts. And this pterosaur is one of many discoveries that contributed to the understanding of pterosaur diets. It was once thought that these flying reptiles were primarily piscivores, meaning they mainly stuck to fish, because of course who would be brave enough to take on the ultimate terrestrial predators? But it turns out that D'Arc and its relatives could. These enormous aerial carnivores would have been big and powerful enough to swoop down and pluck a baby tyrannosaur from under its mother's feet. Fortunately for the Tyrannosaurus, they didn't exist yet, but D'Arc was busy making short work of their ancestors in the meantime. But it likely wasn't swooping that made them so dangerous. Their huge size would have allowed them to raid the nests of Tyrannosaurus, as well as catch and swallow the young whole, much like seabirds do with turtle nests today. Back to the shores, crocodilomorphs were keeping up. Animals like Sphenosuchus held the fort in the early Jurassic and were up to 2 to 3 meters long at most. Probably facultative quadrupeds and didn't quite look like crocodiles, yet. By the mid-Jurassic, adaptations to the more impressive bite forces that we associate with crocodilians began to emerge. The reinforced skull of Sphenosuchus represents an animal beginning to truly specialize in chomping down hard on large animals. Large animals like dinosaurs. Sphenosuchus was a hypercarnivore and top-tier predator that would have hunted the upper Triassic over what is now New Mexico. Both theropods and sauropods were moving up in the ranks here, and a 3-meter predatory coelophysis may have been on the menu. But animals like Sphenosuchus were showing strong signs that they were built to tackle much larger prey. Built-in pneumatic shock absorbers and powerfully welded bone structures combined to show something that no doubt took advantage of the smaller, thirsty dinosaurs that got too close to the water, as did the 7-meter Neosteneosaurus. Both these monsters were likely hunters of the early sauropod lineage, animals like Pseudotetrasauropus, whose footprints in the mud have made up the vast majority of evidence for their existence. By the end of the Jurassic, as pterosaurs were well established, dinosaurs were reaching their peak, and crocs were branching out from the lakes and rivers well into marine niches as well. Dinosaurus was a large crocodiliform, one of the earliest crocodile-shaped crocodilomorphs, and while it spent much of its time at sea, it had heavy, serrated teeth for eating meat, and no doubt would have taken coastal dinosaurs were possible, maybe even if they could fly. This may have been where a recognizable rivalry first began, between crocodilians and birds. So, the skies were a troublesome place for dinosaurs, and especially the group of theropods who, themselves, were evolving ways to make use of it. The first flying dinosaurs, birds, show up in the late Triassic, and as they try to figure out how to be around the water, apex predators like Dinosaurs would have been waiting for them. Lastly, we arrive at the Cretaceous. The final episode in the original trilogy is marked not by a catastrophe, but instead by a very long period of stability. By the Cretaceous, most of the biggest land masses had separated from one another to some degree, and there were ocean currents, reasonable seasons, and other things that worked to create a more balanced climate than the extreme conditions that supercontinents facilitate. This period was immensely long, and brought with it many of the iconic giant dinosaurs like Titanosaurus, ceratopsian herbivores, and the infamous T-Rex. But again, pterosaurs and crocodiliforms matched their pace. In response to dinosaurs getting bigger, pterosaurs put on some of the most terrifying animals to ever take the sky. In the land of Titanosaurs, Quetzalcoatlus held its own, reaching wingspans of over 11 meters and standing as tall as a giraffe on land. This was the reptilian equivalent of a large stork, scavenging and hunting terrestrial and coastal animals on foot. And at 5 meters tall, this was a big-ass stork. Yet, European dinosaurs had their own terrifying pterosaur to contend with, and this one was even larger. Hatzegopteryx may have had a wingspan of 12 meters or more, and perhaps 5 meters tall. This intimidating prospect was the ruler of Hateg Island, now part of Romania. This was an island where the dinosaurs would again evolve to be the subordinate, smaller species in the ecosystem, and Hatzegopteryx took advantage of the dwarf dinosaurs that had been trapped there with it, as well as prey as large as their native iguanodontians. Being isolated on Hateg Island led to a whole ecosystem of dwarf dinosaurs, and the enormous Hatzegopteryx was at the very top of the apex predator rankings. But even on land, full-size dinosaurs weren't entirely safe. Fortunately for the tyrant Lizard King, it didn't evolve until a little after Dinosuchus went extinct. But for the smaller tyrannosaurs of the time, this monster gator would have been a horrifying contender. Up to 11 meters long, perhaps even larger, this would have been the absolute top of the food chain in the Cretaceous waterways. Modern crocodilians like this have the strongest bite forces of any known animal, and this force scales with size, so a beast like Dinosuchus may have had 4 times the bite force of the later T-Rex. Dinosuchus was a large prey specialist with a crushing bite that likely dined primarily on hadrosaurs and other herbivores who came to the water to drink. But even the larger theropods wouldn't have been safe from a croc this big. Dinosaurs were always said to be the dominant force from the Triassic to the end of the Cretaceous, and while they did end up finding their wings in the airspace among the pterosaurs, they never truly made it into the water. Guarding the gate at the edges of rivers, lakes, and oceans were the dinosaurs' oldest nemesis, the Pseudosuchians, who kept up with dinosaur evolution through eons and never once let them through. And even today, 250 million years later after the Great Dying, this rivalry continues. Final thoughts. If we're talking about a truly sustainable apex predator, we should look to the crocodilians. They've been successfully hunting dinosaurs for 250 million years and show no signs of stopping. Some mammals, and even some birds, would one day make it into the water, but crocodilians remained a lethal guardian of the shores. Fish may be their main course today, but birds stay a solid second choice, forever reminded that there should be a hard limit to any creature's dominance. That's all for today, friends. For more prehistoric chaos and tales of extinct beasts that dominated the Earth before us, check out our other videos. And as always, stay curious, fossil files.